done it. First jab done yesterday, and apart from feeling a little bit tender on my shoulder and just feeling a little bit delicate today, that's it. Nothing else. Perhaps I'm one of the lucky ones. Certainly not one of the 14% in the UK that's going to refuse the vaccine for whatever reason. Perhaps they're putting tracking chips inside us in the injection. Isn't that one of the conspiracy theories? I think it is, but let them all get on with it, that's fine. At least it'll give us a this herd immunity they keep talking about, so we can open up our theatres again in the summer, can't we? Which is good. So what I'm going to talk about today is pantomime. And I've got some really good advice, tips, experience to give you from some of our past interviewees. Starting with Matthew Kelly. You remember Matthew Kelly? Game for a laugh and all that. Stars in their eyes tonight, Matthew. And his son Matt Rickson. Now the two of them are over 6 foot anyway. You put them in a dame's outfit, dame's costume each, and 4-inch heels on, and they become nearly 7 foot tall, the pair of them, and they're exactly the same stature. And I'll put a couple of pictures up just to prove my point. And they've made a bit of a point of playing the Ugly Sisters, so they come as a pair almost now. Matt Rickson's also been in the tour of Hairspray, which is very good, playing the John Travolta character, of course, Tracy Turnblad's mum. And Matthew's been in all sorts. He's been in all sorts of straight drama, but he loves Panto, Matthew Kelly, and I've met him a few times now, and he's such a nice guy. And Matthew told me we're a match made in heaven, meaning him and Matt Rickson, his son, and both over 7 feet tall in heels and wigs. And as I said, I can testament to that. A good pantomime really needs to have a good heart and spirit, which goes beyond the footlights. The company has to love what they do and work well together. It all transfers to the audience. And kids aren't stupid. Well, kids aren't stupid, are they? We absolutely love it and have both done Panto for years on our own, but I think we're a Panto double act forever now as the Ugly Sisters. And as the Ugly Sisters, any dame will tell you that it's not really the dame role, because there's two of them. As a dame, there's only one role. We like to play the Ugly Sisters as common and chavvy, but with a lovable side. It's important to remember that there's a fine line between being too nasty and a bit daft and lovable. There's just one moment when we're really horrible, and that's when we rip up Cinderella's invitation to the ball. We often manage to make at least one child burst into tears or shout out, but it doesn't last long and all turns around at the end. And then on amateur theatre, he says, I think amateur theatre is just wonderful. I've been president of my local society, Urmston Musical Theatre, for over 20 years, and I go and see them when I can, which is good, isn't it? Now, Laura Taylor, who used to be with First Family Entertainment when they were in existence, and they used to deal with all of ATG's big pantomimes around the country, but now that's been turned around, hasn't it? And now she's with Imagine Theatre. And they went into the Fairfield Halls just before lockdown, and it was fantastic, the Cinderella they did there. But Laura told me back in the day, I think the perfect panto is taking it really seriously, which it deserves, but making the audience think that it's all happened by accident, and that is the key and the skill to panto. Just that sentence says it all, really, doesn't it? Each step of the way requires a serious approach, but when the audience turns up, you need to make sure they are having fun. If you've got everything else right in advance, then the cast will be having fun, and that will come across and spread through the audience as well. Not a sense, Laura, who's one of the producers. She was a producer at First Family, and she's a producer at Imagine Entertainment as well. So she's talks a lot of sense there. Now Stephen Mulhern, these are all famous people. I don't really need to introduce them, do I? Stephen Mulhern, star of stage and screen, I guess, is one of the big Buttons characters. And if you haven't got COVID around, he would normally be starring in any of the Cinderellas around. And he said to me, if I could play Buttons every year, I would. It just works so well, and I get to do magic and the illusions, because he's obviously a magician as well, and that's how he started. You can be funny as well as pathos. Buttons also makes the audience sad. There's one point in the show where Cinderella tells Button that even though he loves her, she doesn't love him, and that's really sad. Oh no, I better move on quickly. Paul Hendy, who runs Evolution Pantomimes with his wife Emily Wood, is one of the best pantomime writers around. He's absolutely brilliant, and every pantomime is so well constructed and put together and funny, and he comes up with original scenes, original concepts, and he's one of the best. I mean, if you can go to an Evolution pantomime, then you'll be laughing. You'll be laughing all night long. Paul said to me, at Evolution we set ourselves apart from the other big pantomime production companies. We don't view them as competition really. Some of the bigger companies have more venues, and we are organised almost like a corporate organisation, whereas we're much more like a family-run business. We are very hands-on. We know all the backstage staff and the ensembles, and that's how we want it to be. I was a performer for years and did 25 professional pantomimes. That's every year from the age of 17. The more I did, the more I started to think about directing them, and then I started writing and directing them, and finally started producing, writing and directing them. So it's been a part of my life since I was a kid, to be honest. If producers want to pay, this is when Paul talks to me about the big bucks paid to the Stephen Mulherns, the soap stars, you know, the big money, the big names at the top of the bill. If producers want to pay that, then that's fine, but I would say that they're probably not on as much as you think they are. However, some stars are earning a lot of money. David Hasselhoff, who was in Nottingham a few years ago, is on about 50 grand per week. Scylla's done it in the past, and she was on about 75 grand a week, and it's a lot of money. But I think if an artist is worth it and they can bring in 2 to 3 million a box office takings, then why not? That's the age-old question, isn't it? And that's one of the things that amateur companies haven't got the luxury of, forking out money on big names. We've just got to do it in-house, and that's the big difference, really. But Paul carries on. It's all about quality and building a reputation. It can take a bit longer, but reputation is everything. You must go for quality in writing and in casting. I take an awful lot of time and effort in the writing process, and I can vouch for that, to make sure it's good. And I don't and wouldn't ever suggest throwing it together. Some people do. I'm a big believer in writing comedy. That's my forte. We can still do all that, the traditional stuff like the ghost and the bench scenes, but I do like to think that pantomimes are traditional with a contemporary edge. You have to do a little bit of wit. You have to have a little bit of wit in there. So it's working on 2 levels. It's working for the kids, so you've got your audience participation, but there's a level of wit for the adults as well. Suddenly the mums and dads are thinking, actually, this is really funny. And maybe it surprises them, hopefully. And that's true. I've long been an advocate of Evolution pantomimes. And like in Canterbury at the Marlow Theatre, they do the pantomime there every single year. And they're absolutely brilliant. They get 5 stars every time. And they cast big stars, but Paul's talked about the big money. Now, Scott Masden, remember from EastEnders? He's back in EastEnders now, isn't he? He's a policeman now, I believe. Is it Jack he plays? He's a policeman. Now, Scott on amateur theatre. He played Aladdin, Abanazar, the baddie in Aladdin. Some people work in jobs where it's not exactly what they want to do, and they get the chance to go and have a bit of fun, and it's brilliant. Whether you're really ambitious or in a church hall, it covers all the bases, and for the ambitious young people out there, it gives them a nice taster. You don't even need to use the word amateur or non-professional. You're actors, you're doing it. Just because you've got a job as well, it doesn't mean you've got to be labelled an amateur. It doesn't matter that you're getting up and performing a piece. If you say you're an amateur performing a piece, then straight away you're putting yourself on the back foot. If you studied it, if you've worked it, if you've been in a room with people for 2 weeks and you've got a performance and it's a good performance, then it's a performance. I don't want to know if this is a performance by amateurs. How interesting. So Scott's saying it's all in the mind for the audience and the people on stage. Once you say I'm an amateur, perhaps that gives a bit of psychological leaning. Now Scott on pantomime, because he's a big Panto star. There's no holding back in Panto. As an actor, if you hold back in Panto, you're going to fall on your arse. The audience just won't warm to you, and you'll probably never work in this area again. There's an expectation you have to go into it prepared to be a fool and a clown, and all those things that can make up comedy. Some people on the celebrity side of it take it for granted and treat it as a cash cow, but are not really that bothered, and it's really unfortunate when you think that all those people are paying to take their kids to go and see the show, because if you get into it, then you can have so much fun doing it, particularly in Panto. You can go out and be as camp and as fun as you like, and it'll find its natural flow, but it's a really fun experience. It's exhausting, but so what? It's interesting, isn't it? I know he's in one of the biggest soaps or the biggest soap in the country, but he's also very down to earth. He's like an amateur. He does it because he loves doing it. And on playing the Panto baddie, Scott told me, you've got a license with the baddie, it's a lot of fun, the one everyone loves to hate, but you do have to be careful with the villains, and this is what Matthew Kelly told us, that you don't make them too dark and too scary. You want the little kids to get a bit scared, but you also need to do something quirky that makes them laugh. I always play them like a Camp Terry Thomas. He's all evil, but then something ominous will happen and he loves to dance. For the kids, it breaks it, and they'll have a little nervous giggle. You have to find that balance in your audience, and that's who you're playing to. And it is a lot of playing out, which is a device in itself. It's an old English tradition which facilitates a family environment, which you have to balance out. The adults get the innuendo, and the kids get the slapstick. If you get it going at a nice pace, then it's great fun to watch. One of the big keys is pace. People confuse pace with speed. This is interesting. Good bit of advice from Scott here. People confuse pace with speed, but it's closing that gap between conversations and keeping the energy up. It's like keeping the ball up in the air, because if you drop it, then the punchline, the gag, and everything suffers. Let the indulgence come with the performance. So I'd say camp it up. Find a duality. I don't think there's a need to overperform or embellish it too much, otherwise you start to sell it, and an audience isn't stupid, they'll already know. And watch the old sitcoms which look very basic, but creating simplicity is a very hard thing to do. Subtle nuances, little looks, make sure you look out at exactly the right time. In Panto you're playing to the audience, it's a different style, timing, physicality. The Italians call it Caravaccio, part of the mask, comedy and tragedy, but we do have a habit of complicating things far too much. Very interesting. You see, one of the most basic down-to-earth people, Scott Maslin, but gives us some of the best advice. Now, Bobby Crush, you know, the old entertainer, plays the piano, always plays the piano on stage, and I think in pantomime he played the piano on stage a bit. But he was playing the Dame in Aladdin, I think it was. He worked with Scott Maslin in Bromley on Aladdin. That was part of UK Productions. Bobby told us, this is the last one, it's hard work and I don't make my life easy for myself. I choose to do 10 costume changes per show, which is 20 a day or 120 a week. I think when a dame makes a new entrance, it should be in a different frock every time, so when I'm not on stage, I'm in the wings doing some frantic change. I remember going to see Frank Carson. He had one frock for the first half and one for the second, and it was really disappointing. You either play the dame and go the full Monty, or don't bother at all. I knew when I took on the mantle of playing the dame that I wanted to do it wholeheartedly and embrace the role. Quite, he's got the same approach as Scott, hasn't he? I approach my dame in the same way as someone like Les Dawson or Arthur Askey does, with moving the boobs and the price of fish hands. I play, we all know that stuff. I play it very mumsy and traditionally. I'm not sure that when drag performers play dames that always works. I think you have to make the audience aware all the time that it's a fella in a frock. I always try and make my dames friendly and approachable, whereas I've seen them played very harshly. When I first played a dame, I had dinner with Danny LaRue and told him I was a bit scared. His advice was, I'm not going to do Danny LaRue's voice, don't worry. His advice was, because I'd done so many pantos over the years, I just needed to take a little bit of each of them and add a little bit of something of my own. I think I'm probably the only piano playing dame out there. We make a big thing of the piano being wheeled on, and Widow Twanky is persuaded to give them a number. Bit of rock and roll or boogie woogie. I took Dan's advice, and my first dame was at Billingham in the year 2000, where I made my debut in Danny LaRue's frocks. Most generously, he said I could go and visit all of his costumes, which were in storage in Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and go through them with his personal assistant Annie, who would alter them for me. So that's what happened. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting? And yeah, we talk about advice and playing the dame and all sorts of stuff, and how to make it work. But Panto is such a big part of the amateur theatre scene, as well as the professional scene, of course, that you can never give too much advice to people, because if one person takes away one thing from one bit of advice, then it's work. You've done your job, haven't you? So there we go. Anyway, see you Wednesday. Stay safe, stay well. We'll be back. Keep getting those vaccines. Bye for now.